Thank you all for being here. Really great talks to open the day. I'm Neha Tanna. Really quick intro for myself, and then I will give it to the panel to introduce themselves. GP by background, 8 years in biotech, 8 years in the venture capital industry, and more recently on the LP side. So really excited to talk about access to the UK NHS as well as European healthcare systems. But I'll hand over for introductions. Frédéric, would you like to start?
Very quick. So Frédéric Rosès, 3 different lives. First, entrepreneur in the Healthtech industry. I developed the first online platform in France for medical appointment. Selling software for practitioners and clinics in France during 10 years. Then I'm running nowadays an incubator in France, Descartes Development. With a fund capital too in that incubator, which is included. And third life, strategy consultant, helping pharma and big industry players to have their strategy on the tech.
I guess I look forward to hearing great insights into the French ecosystem. Anna?
Hi, I'm Anna Hawksley. I'm the Director of Professional Services at NHS London Procurement Partnership. Before that, I used to work as a Programme Director in NHS England on cyber programme and also EPRs. London Procurement Partnership runs routes to markets of frameworks and digital purchasing systems to enable suppliers and trusts to be able to buy things and get contracts in place.
Exciting. You're the person we're going to want to... Mike, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name's Mike Bell. I'm chair of 2 integrated care boards, the commissioning organisations for the NHS in England, North West London Integrated Care Board and North Central London. Together they cover about 48%, 49% of the London population, with an annual revenue budget of around about 12 billion, which makes us the largest single commissioner in the NHS.
We'll be coming to you for sure. So let's start locally, maybe with the NHS. The first question is, what are the biggest barriers startups or even SMEs, we'll throw in here, face when trying to work with or sell into the NHS? Anna, I'll come to you first.
You guys are probably better at knowing the answer to that than I do. But I think that there's a couple of things. The NHS isn't one organisation. It's 48,000 organisations made up of trusts and ICBs, but then obviously primary care and adult social care. And I think that what that means is you're working for 48,000 organisations, all with different governance structures and different ways of working. So when you think that you've got talking to somebody in a trust, they're rarely the right person. What you don't know is that anything over £25,000 needs to be signed off by the finance director. You need to engage the CIO and everybody else. So they're just really complex organisations. And then public procurement regulations, while they should be supporting SMEs, they do make it difficult to be able to navigate the market, understand which frameworks you should be on, how you can procure, and who you need to engage with. So I think that, and obviously money, but are the key things that are really tricky.
Okay, I'll pick up on a couple of those points in a minute, but maybe Mike, you'd like to add to that?
I mean, the key thing is actually the fractured market, the fact that there are so many buyers out there. And we are simplifying that in the sense of reducing the number of integrated care boards, but many of the decisions around individual tech options are actually taken at a trust or a lower level. So that makes it incredibly challenging, I think, for anybody trying to navigate. And we don't have common structures in the NHS. So it may be the CIO in one organisation, it may be the Chief Transformation Officer in another, and it may be a completely different job title in the third. So even if you get the right job title, you may not get the right person. So it just makes it incredibly complicated. We could not design a system more difficult to navigate if we tried.
Well, what I'm picking up from both of you is it sounds like stakeholder management is key, sort of finding out who the people are and what would be your advice to someone maybe just first approaching the NHS? Is it start small locally or maybe start higher up? Some practical advice that they could walk away with, if possible. If not, don't worry.
I think working It's understanding who the decision makers are really early on. So starting locally, yes, because unless you're working at ICB or regional level, it's really hard otherwise. But understanding, is the person that you're talking to going to be able to make a decision on the money? And are they going to be able to make a decision on actually how the contract is going to be set up and what the procurement rules are? So I think those two things, and does it align to the digital strategy? Because if a clinician thinks it's the most amazing tool in the world, if it doesn't get approval by the CIO, it will get blocked. So it's important to be able to navigate money, commercial, and digital.
Thank you.
And I think one of the things that we're trying to do as we move into the new system is actually be less reactive as commissioners. So rather than waiting for you to come to us with ideas, we are keen as we move forward over the next 18 months to be presenting you, groups of you, with sticky problems that we want you to come together and help us design a solution for. So I think that we are moving, partly because of all the challenges that we've got, but at present there is everything that's just been said in terms of getting to know who has the decision-making powers, the level of their authority, and it's also about relationships. If you can get clinical champions, that actually is that's a really good way of moving forward.
Thank you. And maybe coming to you, Frédéric.
Yeah.
I know you're more familiar with the mainland Europe, so maybe some insights into how to approach.
Yeah, maybe taking a step back and
Sure.
very practical way and European perspective. I would say that if you reflect on your go-to-market strategy, there is probably two time in your reflection. The first one, which is sometimes a bit offset, is the compliance reflection. Compliance and regulatory framework are very complicated in Europe. And if we want to make it simple, you have three kinds of compliance. You have the data and AI compliance now with the EU AI Act, so you have to think about it. You have your homologation, and you have your reimbursement regulatory framework too. If you go to the layers, you have the European layer, you have the country level layer, and in some country you have the regional layer. So the first step of the reflection to the go-to-market is probably to be in the right compliance framework and attitude. The second step is how to go to the procurement. And the procurement is very different, I think. If you go, strategy should be very different if you are in the UK or if you're in France or if you're in Germany. Why? Because in UK, it's very centralized. NHS is almost a prominent healthcare provider. If you go to France, for instance, you have the public sector, but you have also the private sector. And both give you opportunity to enter the market. If you go to Germany, you have the public, the private sector, and on top of that, you have not only public funding, but you have private funding through insurance. So the procurement should be also a strategy as itself. And when it comes to tackling some very specific health provider, then you have to go to the individual person, as you said, Anna. You have to go to identify the right person at the health provider who will be an advocate of your solution. The advocacy group also. So you have, for the patient, all the people around your digital tool that can help you find the right way, the right place at the health provider to enter.
Thank you. Once they get through and they find the right person, which sounds like a big feat to begin with, what would you say, what lessons can be drawn from whether evidence generation versus speed to market versus relationship management? Can each of you maybe share your thoughts on, I don't know, if you could say priorities. I know it's difficult to say just one thing, but that around that space. So once they're sat in front of you, when they're having the conversation, what are the kind of things you look for to potentially get to the next step? Frédéric?
Yeah, it really depends, that question, about the kind of digital solutions that you are doing. Because if you are providing a very health-oriented digital tools, then the question is more complex because you will have to provide real-world evidence. If you are providing a tool which is more on the productivity side, gaining cost and time on the health provider, then it's probably easier to find the the key KPIs, the key evidence to put in front when you are promoting your digital solution. So the way to do that is first find what is an evidence for you. Is it on the productivity side? Is it on the better health side? And if it's on health, of course, you will have to go through all the pattern. Go on clinical first, and then build evidence on real-world evidence after that. And at each step, as I just said before, the regulatory framework that apply to will change. It's not the same, so you will have to redo the work on the regulatory side and on the procurement side strategy.
Interesting. Anna, any thoughts?
The NHS is risk adverse, and obviously, to your point, they have to be, because in the clinical world, you're treating patients. So they do want evidence. Pilots is a good way of being able to get that. But also, there is now a movement in Department of Health and Social Care trying to look at value-based procurements, and that's being run by David Lawson, and being able to evidence and demonstrate the benefit either to the patient or to the clinician or to improve efficiency is absolutely key, linking into the 10-year health plan, so that you can evidence in procurements when it comes to market that your product is going to make a difference. And I think that is important. Now, relationships are everything. People buy from people. So I'm not dismissing that. And I certainly don't think that procurements through routes to market are the be-all and end-all. But there is a desire and a move in medtech at the moment to be much more about what value is this product or service now going to deliver and make a difference to patients.
Okay, and I know we were talking backstage about the difference between some of these things, so I'm jumping around here a bit, but I'm trying to keep the flow of the conversation going and relevant. Could you talk a little bit about what you were saying backstage around the difference between procurement and pilot programs and how that differs and how that might be relevant to some of the audience here today?
What we find is that suppliers have great conversations with trusts. They get behind, a clinician gets behind them. They start to provide pilots within trusts to make a difference. And that is great because it provides case studies, it enables you to be able to evidence what's happening. But then the pilot comes to an end, they can demonstrate that it makes a difference, but there's no route to market and there's no contract in place for an ongoing service. And that causes huge problems for everybody, the supplier because they have to down tools, but also for the trust because they then need to find a legal route to market to be able to procure the product or service that they're interested in. And then either that's a dance because they go to market and it's a done deal, which obviously it shouldn't be with procurement regs, or it ends up being a position where everybody bids and it's not always the person that's putting all of the work in the pilots. LPP are about to produce a framework that will tie in pilots to actually being able to have an ongoing contract. So when we develop an AI framework that's coming out in the next couple of months, hopefully that will solve some of these problems. But it is important to remember if you're doing a pilot, how are you going to get the money and the contract at the end of it?
Good point. Yes, please do, Mike.
Yeah, if I could follow on from Anna, because I've gone into my organisation, I've seen so many pilots taking place, often showing real benefit, but we have not then gone on to purchase them. So I have now said, we don't do pilots in northwest and north central London. We do first stage commissioning.
Say that part again.
So we do first stage commissioning,
Right.
which means that you cannot commence a programme unless you say, these are the gateways that the programme has to pass through. If it passes through these gateways, this is the ongoing commissioning route. And that feels quite revolutionary in NHS terms.
Can you talk about the gateways? What do you mean?
Oh, well, that would just be, what are the criteria we've set for success?
Right.
You know, is it substitution? Is it efficiency?
Right.
Is it clinical outcomes? Or what combination of those? If those metrics are hit, then the next stage of commissioning should take place.
And is that written in the public domain somewhere, or is that on a company?
We are working it through.
Working through it, right.
And we're also talking to colleagues in LPP on this.
Oh, great. Okay.
It's not that dissimilar to the way you've been talking about the AI approach.
Yeah, and to be able to have a pathway for a supplier to say right from the very beginning, if the pilot or the first stage works well, there will be a route and funding and a way of being able to roll it out. Because otherwise, suppliers often work for free or for very little, do the pilot, and it doesn't go anywhere because you haven't sorted out all of the rest of the governance, which we're so keen on in the NHS.
Could I say one other thing?
Yeah.
From where I sit, the most useful digital innovations are those which aren't siloed by acute sector, by primary care sector, or by community sector. They are those which actually traverse the whole of the pathway or are holistically wrapped around the patient. They are almost impossible to sell at present because the commissioning budgets for each project sits within either the acute or primary care. So what we find most useful, our current contracting arrangements actually force tech companies away from delivering that holistic solution into operating and perpetuating the silos which are actually so unhelpful when we're talking about delivering integration. So part of the reason why we're looking at these new models of commissioning is so that we can actually procure across pathways rather than institutionally by sort of acute sector or primary care or so on.
That's really interesting. Yeah, really interesting. I have 100 questions, but I'm going to stop because I know Frédéric had a point.
No, just to go on European perspective on this.
Yeah. Yes,
it seems that in the UK the constraints are still a bit strong on that. And if you go to Germany or to France, you have those fast-track frameworks that help digital tool to be deployed and financed during maybe 6 to 12 months. The time for the tools to build evidence, and then you have a final gate, and if the evidence has been built during these first 6 to 12 months, then you have a larger financing to deploy the tool a bit larger, or even nationally. So I don't know if it exists, but at the time I looked at it, it was not the case in the UK. But if you go to Germany or to France, you have this kind of framework. It's just a question for you to say, where is the best place, I would say, to develop and to deploy the tool? And in fact, UK may be the right place, but in some cases you have to look at a European strategy to find if some countries are more easy or easier in terms of regulatory framework.
Good point. If I may just jump in, there is an assumption that sometimes some of the European countries are a bit easier. In your experience, given that you've built something already, would you say that that's true?
To my experience, in the startups that in the incubator we had, it was quite the case that in Germany, Germany was the first to implement those fast track for digital tool, and the financing was much easier than in France at that time. It was 5 years ago. And it helps digital tool to be deployed in some hospitals and clinics and have the financing, which is a big point in terms of procurement, and to let time of people to build evidence on it. France has done that since 2023, so it's not very old, but it's starting to have quite a strong impact in terms of digital tool deployment.
Okay.
I don't know if in the UK if it's the same.
Yeah, what would be your opinion on that?
We don't have the same. NHS England runs the Innovation Network, and obviously they have the Health Innovations Network. So there are elements of small-scale things that go on when there's funding, but nothing, I wouldn't say, the same.
No, I mean, within regions we are trying, so London region, which is probably the most cohesive regions, is working towards that sort of model so that we can rapidly deploy, we can rapidly commission. But we have been about 2 years in trying to land some really, really simple procurement. So teledermatology, as an example, which we want to procure on a London-wide basis, changing all the pathways across London. We are close to doing it, but it's taken 2 years and we still haven't landed it. So there is something about And we'll use that as a learning tool for ourselves in terms of future region-wide procurement. But at present, it's an aspiration which we are working towards.
At least the aspiration is there. Moving a little bit, I guess, to the future. You've touched on a few bits and pieces. What upcoming reforms or funding initiatives are you aware of or know that are coming that could open doors for digital health integration?
Shall I kick off with something that we're trying to do in London?
Yeah, please.
So the overall budget for the NHS in London is 26 billion. And we are trying to create an innovation fund of 1%. So that's 260 million. And we want to use that as leverage with venture capital to multiply that figure by about fourfold. So we're at sort of £1 billion for a year for investment in new technology. The current changes to integrated care board structures and the downsizing of NHS England have slightly thrown us off track. But I think that there is a reasonable chance towards the end of the next financial year we will have put that in place for the future. We had been aiming for April 26 for the fund, but for various reasons since March of last year, or this year, things have been somewhat distracted. But it is an aspiration, and we think it's credible, and our conversations with VCs suggest that that would be a vehicle that they would want to co-invest in.
Co-investing together alongside?
Co-investing in together. It's also thinking of health tech companies looking at the way in which individual NHS organisations or the NHS at a regional level can actually become equity partners in those businesses so that we get long-term value as the NHS from those investments beyond the impact that it has on patient care or efficiency. So it's quite an ambitious model within London that we're aiming for.
That's great. I mean, I've seen that model actually in the US. They're not afraid to do that, where they take equity stake in businesses. And actually, if I may ask a total left field question, I was going to follow
just on that, we have King's Venture Partners already doing that, which is part of the Academic Health Science Network in South London.
It's the Meridian.
Yeah,
Health
and I mean, it's relatively small.
Yes.
But it actually is, it does have the capacity for NHS to hold equity, and there are a number of digital health tech initiatives, particularly in GST and King's Hospital, which are have that shared equity.
It just
basis.
takes one, though, to get the ball rolling. It's interesting because I was going to ask about incentives, because often venture capital incentives, or KPIs, for lack of a better word, are very different to the way a public service entity runs. So how have you found, if at all, that negotiation between a very capitalist approach versus a public service approach? Has that been an issue?
It has been an issue, and one of the key issues in those conversations has been about how can the NHS guarantee pace. So if you're a VC, 12 months, 18 months is sort of a time horizon you expect for your investment. Our decision-making in the NHS means that 36 months is actually good going for many of the procurement decisions. No offence to LPP. This is actually the decision-making within trusts in particular. And then it comes back to that, the NHS being fundamentally risk-averse. What we're trying to do is look, and it comes back to that, the gateway approach. So if you have a gateway, so you do a pilot or you do a first stage commissioning, you then have second stage commissioning where the VCs can see some revenue beginning to
Progress,
come in. And that gives them confidence to continue their level of investment so that you can move on to third stage, which ideally would be full commissioning at scale. Interesting,
thank you. Just coming back to the future question, Anna or Frédéric, if you have any thoughts?
It's not nearly as exciting as yours. There is national funding coming out. It was announced as part of the spend reviews, but I think it's coming down very, very slowly. Business cases are still being written with NHS England, and that is for digital infrastructure. It's for expanding the usage of EPRs, AI, but what that means is still to be determined, and digital diagnostics. There is some money coming out this year for social value and sustainability, but other than that, I think it's going to take a really long time, and therefore looking at it from a trust level rather than from a national level is going to be key, because waiting for the money to filter down will be another 18 months, would be my prediction, but I'm not in NHS England anymore.
Interesting. How about you across mainland?
Yeah, mainland. So, as I said, you have those fast-track framework which are associated to funding for those solutions, digital tools, and so on. But I would also say that in mainlands, or at least in many countries like France, Germany, even Italy, you have also the private sector, which is quite important. In France, for instance, you have 2 or 3 very large clinical groups and hospital groups, which are funding themselves some experiment. And this is a very usual way also for startups to enter the market and then to jump afterwards into the public sector. So this is the first answer. And the second answer is it's less centralized even for the public sector. You have those procurement groups which are quite regional in France, in Germany, or in Italy. And so you can have a very localized strategy in terms of funding if you find the right KPIs that is fancy for some people at the local hospitals or the local groups. So this is, to my feeling, a bit more open than what I hear here.
Okay, okay. I'm just trying to keep an eye on the time. We've got maybe 3-4 minutes. Any examples of do's or don't do's that you would share with the audience, whether they are startups or investors? What are the, maybe start with the don't do's and then we'll go to the do's. Would you like to start? Difficult one.
I think it's easy to do the do's. So do build relationships, do get clinical champions. I suppose the don'ts are don't try doing something without clinical champions, without having built relationships. So it's just the inverse of the things you really must do.
So the don'ts.
Always good to do the don'ts.
If you look at people when we are as entrepreneurs, they are usually very product or solutions focused, and these kind of steps require to just have a step back, to build a new strategy in terms of go-to-market, to handle high-level go-to-market where I want to push my solutions, and very practical also orientation in the work. But outside of the product, it's not the same reflection that you had. It's not scientific. It's really business-wise. And usually what we see is that people that develop solutions, they like scientific stuff, but at some point, just step back and be more business-oriented.
Good advice. Anna, anything from your side?
I think do find the right people, do gain the clinical buy-in, but also do understand how the routes to market work for trusts and the public sector procurement regulations. Consider resellers or DPSs that enable you to be able to add suppliers on a regular basis. Frameworks that have got a reseller on, which many of them do, enables you to be able to access procurements really quickly. So being able to consider and recognise that public procurement regulations exist and have to be abided by. So how can you help the trusts to be able to understand how they can access your products legally is really important.
Good point. And last left field question, I promise. I did warn you backstage that I go off piece. I'm a really big fan of learning from the giants that came before us. So are there any examples of companies or people or individuals that you have seen as, this is really good, inspiring, aspirational, perhaps that we can go away and look up and we can learn from as we build out these companies?
Can I go first? You don't steal it. Nerve Centre. So I used...
Say that again.
Nerve Centre. So I used to work on the EPR programme. They came through the Health Innovation Network. They started off from scratch. They are now selling hundreds of millions of pounds worth of electronic patient records in a very, very short space of time. The market was ripe they were there at the right time, but they are British and they have done a cracking job of being able to influence central teams and the market.
Thank you. Mike?
I wonder if I could finish off on something which I think is optimistic.
Yeah, please do.
And this is about a pitch to invest in London, to work in London. This autumn, Life Sciences Week, November, we're anticipating that we will launch the single data environment for all healthcare records in London. That is will be the first major city in the world covering our entire population and gathering all of the data from that population. And it's the second most diverse city in the world. So that is data usable in tests across the world. It will allow trials, and I'm not using the pilot word, first stage commissioning, to actually use the SDE to draw evidence of outcomes and effectiveness in a way that hasn't been possible before. To add to that, MHRA, the Medicines Healthcare Devices Regulatory Agency, is currently deep in negotiations with the FDA in the US. We are anticipating there will be a significant shift in terms of the regulatory environment between the UK and the US, which means, again, come to London, we've got the SDE, test your products or your services there, and you will be fast-tracked in the US market as well. And this is a major, major opportunity for health tech companies, but also for VCs to see where things potentially are going.
Yeah, that's actually a good point, and I will come to you to say that, but it's just more to allow the flow. I've heard the same thing. I've done it myself through therapeutics, where we have piggybacked on an FDA submission to fast-track a drug in the UK, which is great. I've never seen the MHRA work so fast, and it was brilliant. But also, I think we should be very proud of not only the NHS, but organisations like the MHRA and NICE, where the globe really looks at the credible, robust science that goes into the technology appraisals and the assessments. In Singapore recently, I was at an event where they were just like, well, what do you think NICE would say? I'm like, what? Why do you want NICE? So they're like, yeah, because I think there isn't that structure for robust analysis yet in a lot of these places. So if there's anything that we can leverage, it's the solid foundation on which the appraisals and analysis are done. I just wanted to add that point in, and we should be very proud of that. Sorry, go on, Frédéric. Who can we learn from? Who's the giant that you would recommend?
In France, you have this platform which is called Doctolib. And Doctolib is started as a very simple online platform for appointments, and now is at 50 million people as a customer. So every French, basically, guy has Doctolib on his phone. And he's moving along the value chain. It's now going to be a health chatbot to help people in prevention, in adherence. And they are building a data lake with some patient data, and so competing with a national data lake. So this is a good example of one medtech that started with a very simple kind of application, and now, which is so successful that it's clearly one of the biggest actor or player in the health ecosystem in France, and probably moving. They built AI to help doctors in their patient relationship, patient consultation, and so on. So this is already something which is going bigger and bigger because they are on all the smartphones in France.
I think it was mentioned in the keynote speech, actually. I think this has got to leave. So yeah, thank you for sharing. Any final comments from any of our... Thank you so much. I will close it there, but thank you so much for giving your time and your insights.
Thank you.